When we talk about phonological processes, it is very rare that a phonological process will apply to just one sound in a language. Normally, it applies to a natural class of sounds. And a natural class is just any group of sounds that share some similar feature. Now, this means that we're going to need to think more carefully about our sounds and go beyond phonetic descriptions. But once we understand the features of sounds, we can then form groups. So, for example, PT and K would be the natural class of English voiceless stops. PTK, BDG, and the glottal stop included would be just the natural class of English stops. Now, there are some cases where phonetic descriptions aren't enough. For example, the sounds s, z, sh, zh, ch, and j form a natural class, but if we take a look at their descriptions, two of them are alveolar, four of them are post-alveolar, so there's no commonality there. Some are voiced, some are voiceless, there's no commonality there. And then four are fricatives and two are affricates, so there's no commonality there. But actually, these all have a very similar feature in that they're all considered to be strident sounds. And strident sounds are your noisy fricatives and affricates. So if we have features, then we can capture this natural class with a feature like stridency. But with just phonetic descriptions, we're not going to be able to get at that. So there are a lot of features out there, and features are essentially plus or minus properties that certain sounds have. And every feature is exactly one property of sound. So if we take a look at the feature specification for T, we're going to see a lot of different words here and features, and we'll understand them all in detail one by one, learning to ask yes or no questions to identify whether something is plus or minus. So for example, T is a consonantal sound. It is not syllabic, it's not sonorant, it is not voiced, the glottis is not spread, the glottis is not constricted, this is not a continuant sound, this is not a nasal sound, this is not a sound with a delayed release, this is not a sound with lateral airflow. It is a coronal sound, this is a place of articulation, and under the coronal specification, this is an anterior sound, which means it's a little bit more forward than other coronal sounds. So if you didn't understand that, that's fine, but we'll learn all of these features one by one, sorted into different classifications. So the first one is going to be the major class features, and these will help distinguish between our consonants, glides, and vowels. Now, consonants can be broken up into three categories, which are obstruents, nasals, and liquids. And obstruents is a term that captures oral stops, fricatives, and affricates. So whenever you hear the word obstruent, think of your oral stops, your fricatives, and your affricates. So basically anything that's not a nasal, liquid, glide, or vowel. So there's a few major class features. One is consonantal, and this just asks, is there obstruction in the vocal tract? So is the sound a consonant? That's the question you can ask. So plus consonantal sounds are going to be consonants like P, T, K, S, Z, sh, and ch. Also nasals like N and M. And then sounds that are minus consonantal will be your glides, vowels, and sounds like h and the glottal stop. And that's because this obstruction, or H in the glottal stop, does not occur in the vocal tract, but occurs down in the glottis. Now, syllabic sounds help differentiate our consonants and glides from vowels. So, can the sound act as a nucleus of a syllable? And this is usually reserved for vowels. So, vowels are plus syllabic, while anything that's a consonant or glide will be minus syllabic. The last one is sonorant. And there's two ways you can think about this. In an intro textbook, a lot of the time you'll be given this mnemonic, which is like, is the sound singable? So you can hum nasals, you can hold liquids, you can kind of sing glides, and you can definitely sing vowels. While obstruents, your stops, fricatives, and affricates can't be sung, it can't be held. Now, to me, that's a difficult way of explaining things, so I like to think about the air pressure discussion. So if these are your teeth, if there is more air pressure inside the mouth than there is air pressure outside of the mouth, so let's just do something like this so we can see that, okay, yeah, this is a face. If that looks like a rabid dog or something. If there's more air pressure inside the mouth than outside the mouth, then it is minus sonorant. So when you think about your stops where air is being held, or your fricatives where it's more air pressure inside than outside causing that turbulence, or you think about affricates that start as a stop and release into a fricative, these are all minus sonorant sounds. With nasals, liquids, glides, and vowels, there is equal air pressure inside and outside the mouth, so these are plus sonorant. So I think this is the only major class feature that really requires some sort of memorization if you're not comfortable with feeling the air pressure differences inside and outside of your mouth. Now, we also have laryngeal features. So these are things that your glottis is doing. So voice is pretty straightforward, is the sound voiced. If it's a voice sound, it's plus voice. If it's a voiceless sound, it is minus voice. It's just that straightforward. We have two more specific ones, which is spread glottis and constricted glottis. Now, spread glottis is asking whether or not there's aspiration. So when you take a look at aspirated P, T, and K that occur at the beginning of stressed syllables, those are plus spread glottis, and also the H, because if we're making a fricative, our vocal folds are going to be open as air comes out of it. Every other sound is going to be minus spread glottis, so you can really just learn the ones that are plus spread glottis, and everything else will be minus. Constricted glottis is asking if the glottis is closed, and the only sound that we have in English that does this is our glottal stop. Everything else is going to be minus constricted glottis. So let's fill out some feature matrices for these sets of sounds. So if we have any sort of vowel out there, how would we assign pluses and minuses? Well, vowels are not consonantal. They are syllabic because you can insert them as a nucleus of a syllable, and they're sonorant because they have equal air pressure inside and outside the mouth. In other words, there's a lot of space inside your mouth because your tongue is the only thing moving around and it's not impeding any airflow. Now, what about glides? Okay, glides are not consonantal. They don't have that obstruction in the vocal tract. There's still quite a bit of room. It's a lot like a typical vowel like e or oo when you think of ya or wa. They're also not syllabic. So we can't make a syllable around a glide. We need a vowel sound to form a syllable. But they are sonorant. So the air pressure is very similar to a vowel like e or oo, equal air pressure inside and outside the mouth, so these are plus sonorant. So if you want to know the differences between vowels and glides in terms of features, it's really just a difference in the syllabic feature. The consonantal and sonorant are going to be the same between both of them. Now, what about aspirated voiceless stops? Well, it's a voiceless stop, so they're going to be consonantal. They're consonants, so they can't be a peak of a nucleus, so it's going to be minus syllabic. Stops have different air pressure inside and outside the mouth, so these are minus sonorant. Now, in terms of spread glottis and constricted glottis, these are aspirated stops. So these have a puff of air when you produce them. So these are plus spread glottis, but it's not constricted glottis. It is going to be minus constricted glottis because we're not looking at the glottal stop there. So those are some minor feature matrices at this point that cover three different types of natural classes. Now we have some manner features. So these are all about the different manners of articulation, so basically about airflow. So continuant is asking whether there's continuous airflow through the oral cavity, very specifically the oral cavity. So sounds that are plus continuant would be your fricatives, liquids, glides, and vowels, and sounds that are minus continuant would be your oral stops as expected. Also nasal stops. So even though airflow continues out of the nasal cavity, there is obstruction in the oral cavity for nasal stops. So they are minus continuant. And then affricates, they start basically as a stop, so they're minus continuant. Now, the nasal feature is what talks about airflow through the nasal cavity. So sounds that are plus nasal would be our nasal stops, or even the nasalized vowels that we saw before, like eh in pin, for example, with a little tilde above it. Every other sound is going to be minus nasal. We have two more manner features. One is delayed release. So delayed release is basically letting us know whether or not we have an affricate sound. So is the closure of a sound released slowly? Well, you can think of it as ch and j. When you start the sound, it begins as a stop, and then it releases slowly into a fricative. So that's what the plus delayed release feature is capturing. Everything else is going to be minus delayed release. Now, in terms of our last feature here, lateral, we're asking whether air flows through the sides of the tongue or not. So in English, we have L, and then we also have our dark L as plus lateral sounds, and everything else will be minus lateral. So let's think about some of our manner features for these groups of sounds. If we're dealing with M, N, and N, we can ask ourselves, is it continuant? Well, remember, continuant is about the oral cavity, and it is blocked in the oral cavity. We're closing our lips to make an touching the alveolar ridge to make or touching the velum to make So these are all minus continuant sounds. They are, however, nasal sounds. So when we talk about nasal stops, these are plus nasal minus continuant sounds. Now, what about L? Oh, well, we can hold it in the mouth, so this will be continuant. It's not nasal. We don't have any air going through our nasal cavity, and it is a lateral sound because air is flowing through the sides of the tongue. Now, in terms of ch and j, these are going to be minus continuant sounds, even though you can hold them at the end for ch. That beginning bit has obstruction in your oral cavity, and that is what the delayed release is doing here. This is plus delayed release as we release into a fricative towards the end of the sound. Now we have some place features. And place features are a little bit more general than what we use in our phonetic description. And they relate to the bottom articulators of your mouth. So we have labial sounds that include bilabial, labial dental, and labiovelar sounds. We have coronal sounds, which involve the tip of the tongue. So these are interdental sounds, dental sounds, alveolar sounds, and postalveolar sounds. And then we have dorsal, which uses the back of the tongue or the middle of the tongue for palatal velar, labiovelar sounds, as well as vowels. And if you look at other languages, this also includes uvular and pharyngeal sounds. So there's a nice little diagram of what you could use to remember how these place features are used. So if the bottom lip is used, then it's going to be a labial sound. If the tip of the tongue or the front of the tongue is used, it's a coronal sound. And if the middle or back of the tongue is used, it is a dorsal sound. Note that all vowels are going to be dorsal as well. So if a sound is labial, coronal, or dorsal, there will be other features that come along with it. So the first one is round. Now, round sounds are sounds where the lips are rounded. So w, oo, o, these are examples of our rounded sounds in English, and every other bilabial, labiodental, or labiovelar sound is going to be minus round in this case. So p, b, and the labiodental m is minus round. So if we use a round feature, that means it is going to be a labial feature. So if a sound, like let's say we have T, we know this is going to be a coronal sound. So in terms of our features, we don't actually consider writing about plus or minus round because we only consider the round feature when a sound is labial. Now, coronal features have a couple of them. The first one is anterior. So the question is the tongue touching or in front of the alveolar ridge? So you can think of a little line right here at your alveolar ridge. Everything to the left of it is plus anterior, and everything to the right of it is minus anterior. So anterior just meaning towards the front in this case. So interdentals and alveolars will be plus anterior, and postalveolars and palatals will be minus anterior. The second one we have is strident. So this is asking if the coronal fricative or affricate is noisy. So the natural class we saw a little bit before, s, z, sh, ch, j, are plus strident sounds. And our other two sounds that are coronal, like th and th, these are not as noisy. These don't have as intense turbulence as the other strident sounds. And the last one are dorsal features. So with dorsal features, you can think of them as typically relating to vowels. So we have high, low, and back. And we can draw these on the diagram to show what features are which. So if a feature is in the top row, it is plus high. If it is in the middle or bottom, so mid or low sounds, these ones are minus high. Now, in terms of low, the lowest sounds are plus low, and then high and mid sounds are going to be minus low. So if we want to capture the middle column, sorry, the middle row in terms of our sounds, like for instance, ah, if we want to take a look at this natural class, these would be minus low and also minus high. While if we're taking a look at low sounds, we just need plus low. If we just take a look at high sounds, we need plus high. Now, the one confusing feature is probably back. So back is actually everything that is central or back. So our mid-central vowels are considered to be plus back, while only our front vowels are considered to be minus back. There is no plus or minus front feature, and that's because there are no natural classes that seem to target, they don't seem to require a plus front. So in other words, there's not going to be anything that is plus back and minus front in the middle that we would need to disambiguate. We can just get all the natural classes that undergo phonological processes with minus back and plus back, as well as high and low features if necessary. Now, I should mention, in terms of high and back, we're just looking at vowels here. But if you think about sounds like k, g, and these are all pronounced very close to where u is pronounced. So these sounds are considered plus high and plus back. So when you think about the velar sounds, these are plus high and plus back. Think of them just having the same feature specifications as something like u in terms of height and backness. Now, there's two more, which is tense and reduced. So tense is just asking, is the vowel tense? I think that's pretty straightforward if you understand the phonetic descriptions. And then we have the reduced feature asking, is the vowel reduced? So in other words, is it a schwa? So if it's a schwa, yeah, it's plus reduced. If it's anything else, then it's going to be minus reduced. So let's think about these dorsal sounds here, k, g, and Like I said before, these are going to be plus high and plus back. That captures it. If we want to add that specification in, we would also say minus low. It does not make sense to talk about tenseness or reducedness for consonants because consonants cannot be tense. That is a feature of vowels, and same with reduced qualities. A consonant is not going to be reduced. So let's try some exercises. Let's figure out the feature specifications for U and Z. So U is going to be labial and dorsal. It's a vowel, but it uses the lips for rounding. So we don't write plus or minus around labial or dorsal, we just include them as unary features. So either they're there or they're not. Because U is rounded, it is going to be plus round. In terms of the vowel chart, if we think about where U is placed, it is in the I back. So this is going to be plus high, plus back, minus low. U is a tense vowel, so it's plus tense. And because it's a vowel, we know it can be the peak of a nucleus, the peak of a syllable, so it can be plus syllabic, and it's plus sonorant because there's equal air pressure inside and outside the mouth. Now, in terms of z, this is a coronal sound. This uses the tip of your tongue to pronounce, and this is a noisy sound, so it's plus strident. It is at the alveolar ridge, so we're going to say it's plus anterior. It's consonantal, obviously, because it's a consonant. There's obstruction in the oral tract, so this is plus consonantal. It is not a nasal sound, it's minus nasal. It is not a syllabic sound, it cannot act as the nucleus of a syllable. It is not sonorant. The noisiness from z occurs because there is more air pressure inside the mouth than outside, so that's minus sonorant. This is a voiced sound, and it's continuant. You can hold this and air continuously flows outside of the oral cavity. So I've been doing this for a long time. I've known these phonological features for like 13 years at this point. So it's going to be fast for me to do it, but I do not memorize any of these things. I never have. What I did was I tried to understand the questions that you ask for these sounds produce the sounds, really think about them, draw pictures, look at the IPA chart if necessary, and then work out whether the feature is plus or minus. If you go through the memorization route, there are charts online that show every single feature for every single sound. It is too much to memorize, and it's going to be a lot easier if you just understand the sounds. You'll understand everything better, and if you're taking exams in a real course, you'll perform much better if you just understand the questions to ask and understand how to produce the sounds.